And today I'm going to start reading one of my favorite books, Hiroshima. No one invited you to this party. Not so one. Six ordinary lives intersect in this book at the instant of the atomic bomb blast. And through terror, illness, and ruin, reveal what survival costs. This was written by John Percy in August 24th, 1946, and 100,000 people were killed by the bomb that was dropped by the Enola. Survivors often wonder why they live when so many others die. I wrote a blog about this recently, and I embedded a video about nukes that I thought was the most comprehensive and interesting. It's on Netflix. It's called Nuke. So it's a documentary series. They didn't do very many. I really like this series. It's called Connected, the hidden science of everything. Watch that so you understand the implications if you don't know about nuclear weapons and nuclear war and why we have complete anarchy right now in the world and that this is back on the table. So I'm going to begin reading, and I'm just going to do a straight read. They're short chapters, there are only five, and I'm going to like try to scroll, but I prefer the physical book. So here we go. Chapter 1. A noiseless flash. At exactly 15 minutes past 8 in the morning on August 6, 1945, Japanese time, at the moment when the atomic bomb flashed above Hiroshima, Miss Yoshiko Sasaki, a clerk in the personnel department of the East Asia Tinworth, had just sat down at her place in the plant office and was turning her head to speak to the girl at the next desk. At that same moment, Dr. Masatsuzu Fuji was settling down cross-legged to read the Osaka Asabi on the porch of his private hospital, overhanging one of the seven volcanic rivers which provide Hiroshima. Mrs. Hatsuyu Nakamura, a tailor's widow, stood by the window of her kitchen, watching a neighbor tear down his house because it lay in the path of an air raid defense fire line. Father Wilhelm Kleinford, a German priest of the Society of Jesus, reclined in his underwear on a cot on the top floor of his order's three-story mission house, reading a Jesuit magazine, Simen der Zeit. Dr. Terafumi Sasaki, a young member of the surgical staff of the city's large, modern Red Cross hospital, walked along one of the hospital corridors with a blood specimen for a Wassermann test, and the Reverend Mr. Kayoshi Tanamoto, pastor of the Hiroshima Methodist Church, paused at the door of a rich man's house in Koi, the city's western, and unprepared to load, and prepared to unload a hand cart full of things he had evacuated from town in fear of the massive B-29 raid, which everyone expected Hiroshima to suffer. 100,000 people were killed by the bomb, and these six were among the survivors. They still wonder why they lived when so many others died. Each of them counts many small items of chance or volition, a step taken in time, a decision to go indoors, catching one streetcar instead of the other. I lost my place. Hold on. See, I just made that up. That's not even what it says because my brain did that. Catching one streetcar instead of the next that spared him. And now each knows that in the act of survival, he lived a dozen lives and saw more death than he ever thought he would see. At the same time, none of them knew anything. It might be easier for me to read it off the screen. I like that, but this, I want to be where you are. So I switch. I'm live on Facebook in 2 places, YouTube, Instagram, and Substack. And I'm doing this live because I am taking big, great moves of messy action. I'm learning all my tools as I go. You'll see I've already made such progress if you look at my early videos. And if you haven't read a book cover to cover and you know how to read, this is a great one to start with. Everybody that can read, should read this book. And for those of you who don't want to read it by yourself or you can't read, I'm here for you. The Reverend Mr. Tenemoto got up at 5 o'clock that morning. He was alone in the parsonage because for some time his wife had been commuting with their year-old baby to spend nights with a friend in Yoshida, a suburb to the north. Of all the important cities of Japan, only 2, Kyoto and Hiroshima, had not been visited in strength by B-san, or Mr. B, as the Japanese, with a mixture of respect and unhappy familiarity, called the B-29. And Mr. Tanemoto, like all his neighbors and friends, was almost sick with anxiety. I want you to notice, if you're not a solid reader, how long that sentence is. The longer the sentence, the slower you have to read. I call it traffic on the road. Authors use fast pace and slow pace, lots of words or white space on the page, lots of words, and their notice is just long paragraphs and long sentences. That's because the author wants you to slow down, like traffic on the road. When you get to pages where there's a lot of white space and lots of dialogue, that's when the action's taking place in any story you're reading. So notice how long all the paragraphs are. It's because the style of writing it wants you to go slowly. And all the surveys that have been completed on my research page of my website, that's what all the women are asking for in the pleasure area. Please slow down. And in order to read well, you've got to sit still and be the CEO of your brain enough that you can just focus on the words on the page without losing what they mean. So we're supposed to read this slowly. He had heard uncomfortably detailed accounts of mass raids on Kure, Iwakuni, and Tokuyama, and other nearby towns. He was sure Hiroshima's turn would come soon. He had slept badly the night before because there had been several air raid warnings. Hiroshima had been getting such warnings almost every night for weeks, for at that time the B-29s were using Lake Biwa, northeast of Hiroshima, as a rendezvous point, and no matter what the city Americans planned to hit, the super fortresses streamed in over the coast near Hiroshima. The frequency of the warnings and the continued abstinence of Mr. B with respect to Hiroshima had made its citizens jittery. A rumor was going around that the Americans were saving something special for the city. Mr. Tanemoto, a small man. Oh, I lost it. Don't tell me you did that in the middle of a stream. I did. I can fix it. Hold on. I had it all set up and I hit a button. Hold on. I think it's back, right? Yeah, I've got a bigger version. All right, we're cool. I did it again. Hold on. This is live class. This is what happened. Oh my word. I have this big iMac and dozens of screens and stack them all up, and that's what it thinks I'm doing, but it doesn't. Okay. I just don't like to show you the ads, although the only thing I'm shopping for are t-shirts. Have you ever noticed that happen in class? I laugh. I'm like, what an idiot. They don't even know that we know they're watching porn. Because they're coming up. There's intuitiveness in your screens if you don't know it. All right, Mr. Tanimoto, where'd you go? Small but quick. All right, there he is. My apologies. I don't edit either. A small but quick man. Uncomfortably anxiety. He didn't sleep. He slept badly. He was getting warnings. They knew it was coming, Mr. Tanimoto. Something special for the city, and yes, they did. Mr. Tanimoto, a small man, quick to talk, laugh, and cry. He wears his black hair parted in the middle and rather long. The prominence of the frontal bones just above his eyebrows and the smallness of his mustache, mouth, and chin gave him a strange old young look, boyish and yet wise, weak and yet fiery. He moves nervously and fast, but with a restraint which suggests that he is a cautious, thoughtful man. He showed indeed just those qualities in the uneasy days before the bomb fell. Besides having his wife spend the night in Yoshida, Mr. Tanimoto had been carrying all the portable things from his church in the close packed residential district called Nagaragawa. Sorry, I'm bad at those. To a house that belonged to a rayon manufacturer in Koi, 2 miles from the center of town. The rayon man, a Mr. Matsui, had opened his then unoccupied estate to a large number of his friends and acquaintances so that they might evacuate whatever they wished to a safe distance from the probable target area. Mr. Tanimoto had no difficulty in moving chairs, hymnals, Bibles, altar gear, and church records by pushcart himself, but the organ console and the upright piano required some aid. A friend of his named Matsuo, had the day before helped him get the piano out to Koi. In return, he had promised this day to assist Mr. Matsuo in hauling out a daughter's belongings. Wait, I'm backing that up. That was read wrong. So what I'm correcting now is what teacher talk. It's called prosody. And it's like the phrasing was wrong. I didn't pause correctly. So I'm going to back it up just to right here. The day before, he helped him get the piano. Okay, so semicolons separate two complete thoughts. You could put a period there. Author chooses to use a semicolon. What's on one side of the sentence is a complete sentence, and what's on the other side of the sentence is a complete sentence. And the author just doesn't want you to stop, so they use a semicolon. So I'm going to start the semicolon. In return, he had promised this day to assist Mr. Matsuo in hauling out a daughter's belongings. This is why he had risen so early. Mr. Tanimoto cooked his own breakfast. He felt awfully tired. The effort of moving the piano the day before, a sleepless night, weeks of worry, and unbalanced diet, the cares of his parish, all combined to make him feel hardly adequate to the new day's work. There was another thing, too. Mr. Tanimoto had studied theology at Emory College in Atlanta, Georgia. He graduated in 1940. He spoke excellent English. He dressed in American clothes. He had corresponded with many American friends right up to the time the war began. And among a people obsessed with the fear of being spied on, perhaps almost obsessed himself, he found himself growing increasingly uneasy. The police had questioned him several times, and just a few days before, he had heard that an influential acquaintance, a Mr. Tanaka, a retired officer of the Toyo Kisen Kaisha steamship line, and an anti-Christian, a man famous in Hiroshima for his showy philanthropies and notorious for his personal tyrannies, had been telling people about that Tanimoto should not be trusted. Does that sound familiar? I live in the state of Florida where they're trying to pass several bills to put people like me in jail because I'm trying to show you that we are not in a democracy anymore. No, we're in all this. We're in a brave new world, Fahrenheit 54 in 1984. We are here. And the first thing that popped up when all these imperialistic actions are being taken by a non-demo, like a, literally he's Delulu, Humpty Dumpty. The only thing I can think about is, well, if they read Hiroshima, they wouldn't do this. They wouldn't even be having the wars. You've obviously not read the book, all of you in your weird, swampy Washington seats. So I'm here to remind you. In compensation, so Tanimoto is not to be trusted. Me, I'm not. I'm Antifa. I'm not to be trusted. I'm actually the canary in the coal mine. In compensation to show himself publicly a good Japanese, Mr. Tanimoto had taken on the chairmanship of his local someone needs to help me with these, Tanarigumi. I try my best. Or in America, we'd call it the neighborhood association. And to his other duties and concerns, this position had added the business of organizing an air raid defense for about 20 families. He's in charge of everyone's safety. Before 6 o'clock that morning, Mr. Tanimoto started for Mr. Matsuo's house. Remember, he's going to help the daughter. There he found that their burden was to be a tansu, a large Japanese cabinet full of clothing and household goods. The two men set out. The morning was perfectly clear and so warm that the day promised to be uncomfortable. A few minutes after they started, the air raid siren went off. A minute-long blast that warned of approaching planes. And if I taught you this, I'm using crown chakra here. Does it hurt your ears? I'm sorry if I triggered you. So the air raid siren went off, a minute-long blast that warned of approaching planes but indicated to the people of Hiroshima only a slight degree of danger since it sounded every morning at this time. When an American weather plane came over, the two men pulled and pushed the handcart through the city streets. Hiroshima was a fan-shaped city lying mostly on the 6 islands formed by the 7 estuarial rivers that branch out from the Otta River. Its main commercial and residential districts, covering about 4 square miles in the center of the city, contain 3/4 of its population, which had been reduced by several evacuation programs from a wartime peak of 380,000 to about 245,000. Factories and other residential districts or suburbs lay compactly around the edges of the city. To the south were the docks, an airport, and an island-studded inland sea. A rim of mountains runs around the other 3 sides of the delta. A little symbolism for you. Mr. Tanimoto and Mr. Matsuo took their way through the shopping center, already full of people, and across 2 of the rivers to the sloping streets of Koi and up them to the outskirts and foothills. As they started up a valley away from the tight-ranked houses, all clear sounded. The Japanese radar operators, detecting only 3 planes, suppose that they comprised a reconnaissance. Pushing the handcart up to the Rayon man's house was tiring, and the men, after they maneuvered their load into their driveway and to the front steps, paused to rest a while. They stood with the wing of the house between them and the city, Like most homes in this part of Japan, the house consisted of a wooden frame and wooden walls supporting a heavy tile roof. Its front hall, packed with rolls of bedding and clothing, looked like a cool cave full of fat cushions. Opposite the house, to the right of the front door, there was a large, finicky rock garden. There was no sound of planes. The morning was still. The place was cool and pleasant. This is from the New Yorker, by the way. They were the first. That's where he published it first. Then, see, that's what I'm shopping for in the bottom. So I don't have to think about what to wear. I'm just going to wear those. It's going to be my uniform. And it's going to say on them, empathy is sexy. That's going to be my merch. Anyway, then here we go. So that was the author setting the scene. We have 6 characters. We've been told exactly where they are. One's looking like this. One's up sitting with all away, completely protected. Like they're all at different places in the area. Then a tremendous flash of light cut across the sky. Mr. Tenemoto had a distinct recollection that it traveled from east to west, from the city toward the hills. It seemed a sheet of sun. Both he and Mr. Matsuo reacted in terror, and both had time to react, for they were 3,500 yards or 2 miles from the center of the explosion. Mr. Matsuo dashed up the front steps into the house and dived among the bedrolls and buried himself there. Good writers never leave clues behind. We were told about that bedding. It had like a great, just big fat cushions, right? That's where he dives. And if you're wanting to know how to be a good writer, don't include a tidbit that you don't use in the future. It's superfluous. Don't be flurried either. Like, just say it, but say it well. Mr. Tenemoto took 4 or 5 steps and threw himself between the 2 big rocks in the garden. Remember when they dripped that info? He bellied up very hard against one of them, and his face was against the stone. He did not see what happened. He felt a sudden pressure, and then splinters and pieces of board and fragments of tile fell on him. He heard no roar. Almost no one in Hiroshima recalls hearing any noise of the bomb. But a fisherman in his sampan on the inland sea near Tsuzu. Sorry. No disrespect. The man with whom Mr. Tenemoto's mother-in-law and sister-in-law were living saw the flash and heard a tremendous explosion. He was nearly 20 miles from Hiroshima, but the thunder was greater than when the B-52 hit Iwakuni only 5 miles away. I lost you. Oh, that's the next chapter. We're almost there. The end of this. This is why I like a regular book. Okay. Red Cross Hospital. I'm not stopping until I finish this chapter. Oh, I'm going the wrong freaking way. Right? No, I'm not. Okay. I am. Folks. No. Oh, I should just go back to the top because it wasn't that far. The siren jarred awake. Okay. Planes passed over. I do. I feel like I missed, like it jumped way ahead. Matsui, association. He left. The pleasant morning, the place was cool and pleasant, pushing the hand cup, we did it. The tremendous flash, B2, only 5 miles away. She found it. Congrats. Okay. When he dared, Mr. Tanemoto raised his head and saw that the Rayon man's house had collapsed.
He thought a bomb had fallen directly on it. Such clouds of dust had risen that there was a sort of twilight around. In panic, not thinking for the moment of Mr. Matsuo under the ruins, he dashed out into the street. He noticed as he ran that the concrete wall of the estate had fallen over toward the house rather than away from it. In the street, the first thing he saw was a squad of soldiers who had been burrowing in the hillside opposite, making one of the thousands of dugouts in which the Japanese apparently intended to resist invasion. Hill by hill, life for life, the soldiers were coming out, where they should have been safe, and blood was running from their heads, chests, and backs. They were silent and dazed. Under what seemed to be a local dust cloud, the day grew darker and darker. Remember, it was early in the morning, and now it's black. At nearly midnight the night before the bomb was dropped, an announcer on the city's radio station said that about 200 B 29s were approaching southern Honshu and advised the population of Hiroshima to evacuate to their designated safe areas. Mrs. Hatsuyo Nakamura, the tailor's widow, who lived in the secret section called Noborichu. I haven't honestly even practiced reading it. I just know what's going to happen. So I know I'm going to, like, that's what we do. Nothing has to be perfect, but we read and we continue until we're finished. All right. Noborichu, and had long had a habit of doing as she was told. Got her 3 children, a 10-year-old boy, Toshio, an 8-year-old girl, Yeko, and a 5-year-old girl, Maeko. Out of bed and dressed them and walked them to the military area known as the Estate Parade Ground on the northeast edge of the city. There, she unrolled some mats and the children lay down on them. They slept until about 2 when they were awakened by the roar of the planes going over Hiroshima. Notice the people who are alive are not close to the actual drop location. As soon as the planes passed so far, Mrs. Nakamura started back with her children. They reached home a little after 2:30 and she immediately turned on the radio, which to her distress was just then broadcasting a fresh warning. When she looked at the children and saw how tired they were, and when she thought of the number of trips they had made in the past week, all to no purpose, to the East Parade Ground, she decided that in spite of the instructions on the radio, she simply could not face starting out all over again. If you're a tired mom, you know exactly what she felt like. She put the children in their bedrolls on the floor, laid down herself at 3 o'clock, and fell asleep at once. So soundly that when the planes passed over later, she did not waken to their sound. The siren jarred her awake at about 7. She arose and dressed quickly and hurried to the house of Mr. Nakamoto, the head of the neighborhood association, and asked him what she should do. He said that she should remain at home unless an urgent warning, a series of intermittent blasts of the siren, was sounded. She returned home, lit the stove in the kitchen, set some rice to cook, and sat down to read the morning's Hiroshima's Chigoku. To her relief, the all clear sounded at 8 o'clock. She heard the children stirring, so she went and gave each of them a handful of peanuts and told them to stay on their bedrolls because they were tired from the night's walk. She had hoped that they would go back to sleep. I turned the air cold. But the man in the house directly to the south, began to make a terrible hullabaloo of hammering, wedging, ripping, and splitting. The prefectural government, convinced, as everyone in Hiroshima was, that the city would be attacked soon, had begun to press with threats and warnings for the completion of wide fire lanes, which, it was hoped, might act in conjunction with the rivers to localize any fires by starting an incendiary raid. and the neighbor was reluctantly sacrificing his home to the city's safety. So if they're just dropping regular bombs, they're hoping that, like, if fires are started and we carve through some of the city, like a river, and we move all those houses, that will contain the fire from valuable resources. But as you know, it wasn't a little bomb that they used on us at Pearl Harbor. No, it wasn't. This was tit for tat with asshole. And the guys who dropped the bomb felt it as soon as they dropped it. They knew. So tit for tat is kind of how the world works. Like if you look at scientific gaming, Eric Barker book, what's it called? Totally lost my barking up the wrong tree. It's about the science of gaming and like who wins and what's the best strategy, and it all boils down life all time. I had Tom and Jerry on for my previous videos. All life boils down to like Tom and Jerry moments, right? Symbolically, light and dark, right? So that's what they think is coming. They had no idea what was about to happen. And honestly, it's not happened since for a reason, but we're still threatening it. Like, we're still threatening it. So he's knocking down his house. Just the day before, the prefecture had ordered all able-bodied girls from the secondary school to spend a few days helping to clear these lanes as they started to work soon after the all clear sounded. So this entire city knows something bad's going to happen. They've been preparing for weeks. If you've been in a war zone, which I know they're going on all over the world today and right now, all you can do is prepare, right? All you can do is prepare. And for me, because I'm not in a war zone, all I can do is keep doing what I'm doing until more people understand. Mrs. Nakamura went back to the kitchen, looked at the rice, and began watching the man next door. I already read that? No. At first, she was annoyed with him for making so much noise, but then she was moved almost to tears by pity. Her emotion was specifically directed toward her neighbor. Tearing down his home, board by board, at a time when there was so much unavoidable destruction, but undoubtedly, she felt a generalized community pity, to say nothing of self-pity. She had not had an easy time. Her husband, Isawa, had gone into the army just after Mayeko was born, and she had heard nothing from him or of him for a long time until on March 5th, 1942, she received a 7-word telegram. Isawa died an honorable death at Singapore. I lost my husband on March 9th, 2012. These are painful times, and I've been down painful roads, and I think these are important stories for me to tell. So as long as I'm alive, I'm going to continue to tell them. I'll say more about him on his yahrzeit day. So she learned later that he had died on February 15th, the day Singapore fell, and that he had been a corporal. Isawa had not been a particularly prosperous tailor, and his only capital was a sankoku sewing machine. After his death, when his allotment stopped coming, Mrs. Nakamura got out the machine and began to take in piecework herself, and since then had supported the children, but poorly, by sewing. As Mrs. Nakamura stood watching her neighbor, everything flashed whiter than any white she had ever seen. She did not notice what happened to the man next door. The reflex of a mother set her in motion toward her children. She had taken a single step. The house was 1,350 yards, or 3/4 of a mile, from the center of the explosion, when something picked her up and seemed to fly into the next room over the raised sleeping platforms, pursued by parts of her house. Timbers fell around her and she landed, and a shower of tiles pummeled. Everything became dark, for she was buried. The debris did not cover her deeply. She rose up and freed herself. She heard a little cry, "Mother, help me!" And she saw her youngest, Mayeko, the 5-year-old, buried up to her breast and unable to move. As Mrs. Nakamura started frantically to claw her way toward the baby, she could see or hear nothing of her other children. In the days right before the bombing, Dr. Matsukazu Fuji, being prosperous, hedonistic, and at the time not too busy, had been allowing himself the luxury of sleeping until 9 or 9:30, but fortunately had to get up early the morning the bomb was dropped to see a house guest off on a train. So, like, prosperous, wealthy, hedonistic, like anything that feels good all day, he does it. He does what he wants when he wants. He rose at 6 and half an hour later walked with his friend to the station, not far away, across two of the rivers. He was back home by 7, just as the siren sounded its sustained warning. He ate breakfast and then, because the morning was already hot, undressed down to his underwear and went out on the porch to read the paper. This porch, in fact, the whole building, was curiously constructed. Dr. Fuji was the proprietor of a peculiarly Japanese institution, a private single doctor hospital. This building perched beside and over the water of the Kayu River, and next to the bridge of the same name, contained 30 rooms for his patients and their kinfolk. For according to Japanese custom, when a person falls sick and goes to a hospital, one or more members of his family go and live there with him to cook for him, bathe, massage, and read to him, and to offer incessant familial sympathy, without which a Japanese patient would be miserable indeed. Dr. Fuji had no beds, only straw mats for his patients. He did, however, have all sorts of modern equipment: an X-ray machine, diathermy apparatus, a fine tiled laboratory. The structure rested 2/3 on the land and 1/3 on piles over tidal waters of the Kayu. This overhang, the part of the building where Dr. Fuji lived, was queer looking, but it was cool in the summer, and from the porch, which faced away from the center of the city, the prospect of the river, which with pleasure boats drifting up and down it, it was always refreshing. Dr. Fuji had occasionally had anxious moments when the Ota and its mouth branches rose to flood, but the piling was apparently firm enough and the house had always held. Dr. Fuji had been relatively idle for about a month because in July, as the number of untouched cities in Japan dwindled and as Hiroshima seemed more and more inevitably a target, he began turning patients away on the ground that in case of a fire raid, he would not be able to evacuate them. Now he had only 2 patients left: a woman named Yano, injured in the shoulder, and a young man of 25 recovering from burns he had suffered when the steel factory near Hiroshima in which he had worked had been hit. Dr. Fuji had 6 nurses to tend his patients. His wife and children were safe. His wife and 1 son were living outside Osaka, and another son and 2 daughters were in the country on the Kyushu. A niece was living with him, and a maid and a manservant. He had little to do and did not mind, for he had saved some money. At 50, he was healthy, convivial, and calm, and he was pleased to pass evenings drinking whiskey with friends, always sensibly and for the sake of conversation. Before the war, he had affected brands imported from Scotland and America. And now he was perfectly satisfied with the best Japanese brand, Suntory. Dr. Fuji sat down cross legged in his underwear on the spotless matting of the porch, put on his glasses, and started reading the Osaka Asahi. He liked to read the Osaka news because his wife was there. He saw the flash. To him, faced away from the center and looking at his paper, so it's back there, the flash, it seemed to him a brilliant yellow. So his paper, he's reading it. Startled, he began to rise to his feet. In that moment, he was 1,550 yards from the center. The hospital leaned behind his rising and, with a terrible ripping noise, toppled into the river. The doctor, still in the act of getting to his feet, was thrown forward and around and over. He was buffeted and gripped. He lost track of everything because things were so speeded up. He felt the water. Dr. Fuji hardly had time to think he was dying before he realized that he was alive, squeezed tightly between two long timbers in a V across his chest, like a morsel suspended between two huge chopsticks, held upright so that he could not move, with his head miraculously above water and his torso and legs in it. The masterful perfection of how that happened, because he's an important character. And this is a true story. The remains of the hospital were all around him in a mad assortment of splintered lumber and materials for the relief of pain. His left shoulder hurt terribly. His glasses were gone. Father William Kleinsorg of the Society of Jesus was, on the morning of the explosion, in rather frail condition. Not healthy. The Japanese wartime diet had not sustained him, and he felt the strain of being a foreigner in an increasingly xenophobic Japan. In even a German, since the defeat of the fatherland was unpopular. Father Kleinsorg had, at 38, the look of a boy growing too fast, thin in the face with a prominent Adam's apple, a hollow chest, dangling hands, big feet. He walked clumsily, leaning forward a little. He was tired all the time. To make matters worse, he had suffered for 2 days along with Father Silslick. I'll practice these for next chapter. A fellow priest from a rather painful and urgent diarrhea, which they blamed on the beans and the black ration bread they were obliged to eat. Sounds like the food in ICE concentration camps. And the blue butterfly zone. Do you know what that is? I'm going there soon. 2 other priests then, living in the mission compound, was in the Noborichu section. Father Superior LaSalle and Father Schiffer had happily escaped this affliction. Father Kleinsorg woke up about 6 a.m. The bomb was dropped, and half an hour later, he was a bit tardy because of his sickness. He began to read Mass in the mission chapel, a small Japanese-style wooden building which was without pews, since its worshippers knelt on the usual Japanese matted floor, facing an altar graced with splendid silks, brass, silver, and heavy embroideries. This morning, a Monday, the only worshippers were Mr. Takamoto, a theological student living in the mission house, Mr. Fukai, the secretary of the diocese, and Mr. Murata, the mission's devoutly Christian housekeeper, and his fellow priests. After Mass, Father Kleinsorg was reading the prayers of thanksgiving. The siren sound. He stopped the service, and the missionaries retired across the compound to the bigger building. There in his room on the ground floor to the right of the front door, Father Kleinsorg changed into his military uniform, which he had acquired when he was teaching at the Rocco Middle School in Kobe, and which he wore during air raids alerts. Remember, because he's in charge of all the 20 people or 20 homes. After an alarm, Father Kleinschorg always went out and scanned the sky, and this time when he stepped outside, he was glad to see only the single weather plane that flew over Hiroshima each day about this time. Satisfied that nothing would happen, he went in and breakfast with the other fathers on substitute coffee and ration bread, which, under the circumstances, was especially repugnant to him. The fathers sat and talked a while until at 8 they heard the all clear. Then they went to various parts of the building. Father Schiffer retired to his room to do some writing. Father Cyclisk sat in his room in a straight chair with a pillow over his stomach to ease his pain and read. Remember, he's got diarrhea. Father Superior LaSalle stood at the window of his room thinking. Father Kleinschorg went up to a room on the third floor, took off all his clothes except his underwear, and stretched out on his right side on a cot and began reading the Simon der Zeit. After the terrible flash, which Father Kleinschorg later realized reminded him of something he had read as a boy about a large meteor colliding with the earth, he had time since he was 1,400 yards away from the center for one thought. A bomb has fallen directly on us. And then for a few seconds or minutes, he went out of his mind. So his thought is, this is so big that it's a meteor hitting the earth. Did about that much damage. Father Kleinschorg never knew how he got out of the house. The things he was conscious of were that he was wandering around in the mission's vegetable garden in his underwear, bleeding slightly from the small cuts on his left flank, that all the buildings round about had fallen down except the Jesuits' mission house, which had long before been braced and double braced by a priest named Groper. I feel like that's Groper. Gropper? Stopper. Yeah, Gropper. I'm going with stopper. Yeah, it's Gropper. Who was terrified of earthquakes. That day had turned dark, and that Maratha-san, the housekeeper, was nearby crying over and over, Shus Jesusu awarami tamai. Our Lord Jesus, have pity on us. On the train on the way into Hiroshima from the country where he lived with his mother, Dr. Terafumi Sasaki, the Red Cross hospital surgeon, thought over an unpleasant nightmare he had the night before. His mother's home was in Makihara, 30 miles from the city, and it took him 2 hours by train and tram to reach the hospital. He had slept uneasy all night and had wakened an hour earlier than usual, and feeling sluggish and slightly feverish, had debated whether to go to the hospital at all. His sense of duty finally forced him to go, and he had started out on an earlier train than he took most mornings. The dream had particularly frightened him because it was so closely associated, on the surface at least, with a disturbing actuality. He was only 25 years old and had just completed his training at the Eastern Medical University in Tsingtao, China. He was something of an idealist and was much distressed by the inadequacy of the medical facilities in the country town where his mother lived. Quite on his own and without a permit, he began visiting a few sick people out there in the evenings after his 8 hours at the hospital and 4 hours commuting. A long day. He had recently learned that the penalty for practicing without a permit was severe. A fellow doctor with whom he had asked about it had given him a serious scolding. Nevertheless, he had continued to practice. I love people like that. He's trying to help. In his dream, he had been at the bedside of a country patient when the police and the doctor he had consulted burst into the room, seized him, dragged him outside, and beat him up cruelly. On the train, he just about decided to give up the work in Makihara when he felt it would be impossible to get a permit because the authorities would hold that it would conflict with his studies at the Red Cross Hospital. You know what I just realized? I'm reading from the New Yorker, And it's the whole book. And I'm like, no, I usually stop at the end of a chapter. Let me see where this chapter ends. No, it's not the end of the chapter. We're almost an hour, and I'm going to keep going. At the terminus, he caught a streetcar at once. He later calculated that if he had taken his customary train that morning and if he had to wait a few minutes from the streetcar, as often happened, he would have been close to the center at the time of the explosion and would surely have perished. He arrived at the hospital at 7:40 and reported to the chief surgeon. A few minutes later, he went to a room on the first floor and drew blood from the arm of a man in order to perform a Wassermann test. The laboratory containing the incubators for the test was on the third floor. With the blood specimen in his left hand, walking in a kind of distraction he had felt all morning, probably because of the dream and his restless night, he started along the main corridor on his way toward the stairs. He was one step beyond an open window when the light of the bomb was reflected like a gigantic photographic flash in the corridor. He ducked down and on one knee and said to himself, as only Japanese would, Sasaki Gambare, be brave. Just then, the building was 1,650 yards from the center. The blast ripped through the hospital. The glasses he was wearing flew off his face. The bottle of blood crashed against one wall. His Japanese slippers zipped out from under his feet. But otherwise, thanks to where he stood, he was untouched. Dr. Sasaki shouted the name of the chief surgeon and rushed around to the man's office and found him terribly cut by glass. The hospital was in horrible confusion. Heavy partitions and ceilings had fallen on patients. Beds had overturned. Windows had blown in and cut people. Blood was spattered on the walls and floors. Instruments were everywhere. Many of the patients were running about screaming. Many more lay dead. A colleague working in the laboratory, which Dr. Sasaki had been walking, was dead. Dr. Sasaki's patient, whom he had just left and who a few moments before had been dreadfully afraid of syphilis, was also dead. Dr. Sasaki found himself the only doctor in the hospital who wasn't hurt. Dr. Sasaki, who believed that the enemy had hit only the building he was in, got bandages and began to bind the wounds of those inside the hospital, while outside, all over Hiroshima, maimed and dying citizens turned their unsteady steps toward the Red Cross hospital to begin an invasion that would make Dr. Sasaki forget his private nightmare for a long, long time. Miss Toshiko Sasaki, the East Asia Tin Works clerk, who is not related to Dr. Sasaki, got up at 3 o'clock in the morning on the day of the bomb fell. There was extra housework to do. Her 11-year-old brother, Akio, had come down the day before with a serious stomach ache. Her mother had taken him to the Tamura Pediatric Hospital and was staying there with him. Miss Sasaki, who was about 20, had to cook breakfast for her father, a brother, a sister, and herself. And since the hospital, because of the war, was unable to provide food, to prepare the whole day's meals for her mother and the baby in time for her father, who worked in a factory making rubber earplugs for the artillery crews, to take the food by on his way to the plant. When she had finished and had cleaned and put away the cooking things, it was nearly 7. Look at all she did before 7 in the morning. Gee, don't women know that? Not normally 20-year-old women if they're lucky, but hell, this is America that I'm in. The family lived in Koi, and she had a 45-minute trip to the tin works in the section of town called Kanenmachi. She was in charge of the personnel records in the factory. She left Coy at 7, and as soon as she reached the plant, she went with some of the other girls from the personnel department up to the factory auditorium. A prominent local Navy man, a former employer, had committed suicide the day before by throwing himself under a train. A death considered to be honorable enough to warrant a memorial service, which was to be held at the Tin Works at 10 o'clock that morning. In the large hall, Miss Sasaki and the other made suitable preparations for the meeting. This work took about 20 minutes. Miss Sasaki went back to her office and sat down at her desk. She was quite far from the windows, which were off to her left, and behind her were a couple of tall bookcases containing all the books of the factory library, which the personnel department had organized. She settled herself at her desk, put some things in a drawer, and shifted papers. She thought that before she began to make entries in her lists of new employees, discharges, and departments for the Army, she would chat for a moment with the girl at her right. Just as she turned her head away from the window, she removed what was filled. The room was filled with a blinding light. She was paralyzed by fear, fixed in her chair for a long moment. The plant was 1,600 yards from the center. Everything fell, and Miss Sasaki lost consciousness. The ceiling dropped suddenly, and the wooden floor above collapsed in splinters, and the people up there came down, and the roof above them gave way. But principally, and first of all, the bookcases right behind her swooped forward, and the contents threw her down. Her left leg horribly twisted and breaking underneath her. There, in the tin factory, in the first moment of the atomic age, a human being was crushed by books. Chapter 1. So, that may feel long for you if you do not have executive functioning skills. If you want to know what those are, I have a blog about them. There's ADHD blog. Go check out what they are. Good, solid people can sit still in their bodies and their brains and read for long periods of time. And I would like to bring that skill to everyone because it's the most important skill you will ever have. So, a day will come when life will ask you to be skilled and mature, and reading is what's going to get you skill and maturity. So I wrote a blog about this, and I want to practice using my toys. So hold on. I want to get rid of you, hide you. Yeah, I know how to do it in the middle now. Look at me. I learned that in a week. Maybe less, because I didn't really care until today. I'm like, I have redesigned my whole everything. It's so visually appealing to me that I want to make sure that I share it with you. So this is one of my latest blogs. Actually, it's more of an essay. Go read it. I'm going to do a different video about it because I don't want this to be over an hour, and it's headed there right now. But we are still here. We're still in Hiroshima. We have governments bucking up their nuclear weapons, and I know pleasure is a survival skill and that you can reprogram your brain no matter what. So I'll link up. The clock is ticking in so many ways. You know, it's not just nobody teaches you how to survive something like Hiroshima, right? And there are things that we use, technologies that we use today that are because of the bomb. We can tell fake art by looking at the carbon footprint. And it's so long ago now that we are now getting to that phase, which is new technologies have taken over. But if you still want original art, and you want to know if the canvas was really Mona Lisa, they would look at the carbon footprint. Because after Hiroshima, it changed the whole world. It changed the whole landscape. They have a name for the people who survived. That's what the rest of the book is about. And like there's areas in that where the bombs were dropped that the coyote or the wolves came back. They're like water that glows. That's where I'm like, I'm putting visual imagery cues into my um, creating everything I do, and it's coming up with exactly photos that I feel capture the heart of what I'm trying to explain, like in pictures. So if you can't sit still or you don't know what to do right now, I'm just saying, like, buckle up and, you know, look at life continues to happen after the biggest disasters, but not all of us get to continue to be on the planet. And I think we just need a complete shift from this mindset that we have to have power and control over everyone. There's no need for a trillionaire, there's no even need for a billionaire. It's about time that we cancel the broligarchy and build a better world where we don't need war to stay in power. Because if the patriarchy had any emotional regulation, cognitive, critical thinking skills, interpersonal skills to negotiate, if they had real skills, we wouldn't be bombing Iran. And of all people, you created a board of peace and then you go bombing and like literally kidnapping dictators from other countries, like strong man Tom and Jerry energy. Like, remember, they're just a cat and a mouse playing a game, and we the grown-ups, we the people for team humanity have to stand up and call out all the hypocrisies, all the stupidity, all the ignorance. Call it out. I'm calling it out. I'm look, that's the dumbest thing I've heard. Like, I'm calling it out. Sarcasm, like, I'm just doing it because it's like high school all over again. Like, certain people run their mouths until someone shuts their mouths up. And I don't agree with violence. I can cut you with my words, and I'm in, like, go ahead and arrest me and elevate my brand. Just don't kill me. That's what I say. So that's the end of this long stream today. And thank you for being here, and sharing is caring. I need eyeballs on my research page taking my surveys until I actually get like the goods going. So please visit my website, go to the research page, take the quiz.